Buenas noches, good evening. Thank you for being with us. I'm Marta Moreno Vega, founder and executive director of Creative Justice Initiative. And this is part of a series we put together, Culture, Race, Myth, Art, and Justice, when we understood 4 years ago that the infrastructure of our country was being destroyed, that the voice of our artists, the voice of our printed press, and investigators looking at truth, researchers looking at truth were being silenced. And we felt that it was necessary to bring together a family, right, a national family from different parts of the nation to discuss what was going on, one, and two, begin to find solutions for our next steps. As part of this series, we started with our elders early on with Laurie Sims having curated the first panel. And now we're coming to a conclusion with a panel that reflects what we hope will go forward. The cross-section of racial, cultural groups, intergenerational, some of us, the elders who have been through this, and continue to go through this and have birthed a new generation of young people who will continue the work with us and will continue the work going forward. So today, the power of cross-cultural organizing is the second part, and it's critical because as we come to this first series conclusion and we plan the next series, we want to make sure that we hear the voices of the broadest possible community that we can. At the end of May, we will be coming out with the survey findings of many of you who filled out the survey to see the status of our institutions, the status of our artists, to understand what was going on in this period, this historical period, impacted, of course, by COVID-19, but also impacted by 4 years of unprecedented government disruption, right? And also infused and us all lifted by the Black Power movement, the movement for Black lives. So that we have a lot to think about, a lot to talk about, a lot to move forward with. I'd like to thank Neida Martinez for helping us throughout this process and putting together this panel, this two-part series with our young ones. And I'd like to turn it over to Kate and Tiffany, who will be introducing the panel and taking you through the discussion. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Marta. Hi, everybody. My name is Kate Fowler, and I am tuning in from Studio 23 in Richmond, Virginia, which is a community print shop that I work at. And this is my good friend, Tiffany.
Hi, everybody. I'm tuning in from Columbus, Mississippi in my home office. I'm so glad to be here and talk and discuss and like a sponge, just soak up all the knowledge that I can.
That's right. So what we're going to be doing today, as Marta mentioned, this is the second part of our Power of Cross-Cultural Organizing. So we are going to be looking at a broad spectrum of work that's been happening for a long time with our elder leaders on the call, and also with a new generation of emerging organizers and people who don't even identify as cultural organizers, but who might after today's call. So what our goal is for this is to kind of illuminate for people the ongoing power of multiracial, multicultural, intergenerational collaboration, and to open doors between all of us on this panel together for hopefully future collaboration and learning, but to also inspire folks to see the work that they're already doing in their home communities as part of this legacy. And we're also going to just open by grounding ourselves in this kind of urgency of now.
Yes, thanks, Kate. So recently, talking to my neighbors, talking to my family across country, we have just been expressing how we feel in this time. Last week was a difficult time for myself and many of my friends as we held our breaths for some sort of justice to happen in that Chambliss case with George Floyd. And so this is an important time to have conversations like this to navigate where we're going. like Kate was saying, a lot of people do not consider themselves activists, but are just wanting to change. And this is a call where we can discuss those changes, listen to our elders so that they can clear the path for us and give us some pointers and tips on what could help us go forward and be more effective.
That's right. And we're also going to talk pretty frankly about some of the struggles of doing this work together and what it means to show up in another community as an ally, and our failures in that work and also our successes. And so to round this off, as we did on the last call, we're going to show a clip from a wonderful film called The New Rainbow Coalition. And we're going to pass it over right now to our friend Ray, who's going to kind of open up the clip, tell us about it, share 4 minutes, and then we'll meet the panelists. Hi, Ray.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and thanks to the Creative Justice Initiative for using my film as a way to sort of begin this dialogue. The First Rainbow Coalition tells the story of Fred Hampton and his efforts to create an alliance that brought together the Young Lords, which was a Puerto Rican movement at the time, the Young Patriots, which were a group of Southern white Appalachians that were in Chicago, with the Black Panther Party. Now that idea was ahead of its time. If it were to happen today, I think it would still be an amazing alliance. And this film, it's available on pbs.org if you haven't seen it until July. And we're going to show a clip. It's a 4-minute clip from the middle of the film. And one of the things we found out when we started making it is that these alliances were going on all throughout the nation in the 1960s. They were alliances happening between the Chicano movement and the American Indian movement, between Chinese American groups like the Ewok Kern and the Black Panther Party. And to me, so we're still unfolding that history. It's still being, historians are starting to teach about things that we don't know about. Because what we learned back then is that when people get together, start working together, change can happen faster. And then we also learned that the government and local established people with power want to stop those alliances for some reason. And so it's something that we don't learn about. And one of the great things that I like about these conversations is intergenerational. We're going to have a conversation with those that are here in my area, in the 60s. We're also going to talk to generational emerging cultural workers that are on the front lines today trying to make our communities better. And we're excited about you. Yes.
I think we're getting a little bit of interference with your headphones, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe.
Should I take them off?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Okay, let me try this.
Yeah, that would be
better.
Better.
Yeah. Okay. A lot better, thank you.
So yeah, we're just going to go to show this clip from my film, The First Rainbow Coalition. It's a way to start the dialogue and to also highlight and to celebrate those activists from that 1960s era that really put themselves on the line to help forge these coalitions and working relationships between communities, which I think are important, and I think is something we need to look at as we try to improve our world today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
We're feeding 3,000 to 4,000 every week already, and I don't know how many all around the country. We're out there every day and educating. People learn by example. I don't think anybody has an argument with that. And I think the Black Panther Party is doing that.
It was not a disciplined organization, but more of a symbolic mass movement that was trying to bring in more and more people into the coalition.
The idea of the Rainbow Coalition made a lot of sense to us, and we promoted that. We taught about Fred Hampton a lot.
These experiments were happening all over the country. In Chicago, there was another organization called Rising Up Angry. They organized all over Chicago. And there were Rainbow Coalition, small r and small c Rainbow Coalitions all over the place that included groups like the American Indian Movement, like the Brown Berets.
As we worked together, we thought, well, we're really a lot stronger if we do this together. And it made us think that if we really want to change society, we all had to come together and support each other's struggles.
It just felt natural that you would struggle with other people who have been marginalized and who have been held down and who have been oppressed.
Whether you're from the south, north, east, or west, or whether you're a Negro, hillbilly, or a Yankee, we're going to stand here and fight together. Mr. Daly can take his money and his machine, his uptown can take his money and his machine and go straight to H.E. you know where with it.
There's been trouble, and there's going to be more trouble. We're going to continue to have more trouble. You see, people are learning to struggle together. People are learning to fight together. And I don't think that's trouble, you know. I think that's self-defense, you know. I think we're defending ourselves, you know. I think the trouble has already come when urban removal came to this neighborhood.
The Black Panther, we're going to run this black community. We're not going to compromise.
There was this sense of solidarity internationally. These are communities who are struggling for very much of the same goals into oppression.
That we were connected to the world and uniting with all these struggles. That was the beauty of it. The world was on fire and we were part of that flame.
Thank you so much, Ray. So what we're going to do before we introduce all of our panelists is we're going to bring on Denise Oliver, who you saw in that clip from the First Rainbow Coalition, and she's going to speak with us a little bit about working from a community that was not her own toward liberation and from within her own community. Hi, Denise.
Hi, thank you, and thank you for having me. And Ray, I love that film. I think that everybody watching this should watch the film like 20 times. Okay.
Thank you, Denise.
Agreed.
I always open up with saying to people, because they associate me much more with the Young Lords than they do with later when I joined the Black Panther Party. And they always confuse me and make an assumption that I'm Puerto Rican. And I say to them, I'm not Puerto Rican. And they say, oh, yes, you are. You know, and I have to argue with people about who I am. And because I speak the same Spanglish that New York Puerto Ricans speak. I spent a large part of my teenage years in El Barrio, Spanish Harlem, going to places with my cousins. I have Puerto Rican cousins, but I tell them, yo no tengo ni un chipitín de sangre boricua. I don't have not one drop of Puerto Rican blood. You know, I'm a Black American. And the next question I get is, well, then why are you organizing Puerto Ricans? And my answer is, why the hell not? Because as far as I'm concerned, we need to not only deal with organizing in our own communities, we have to take those first steps to go outside of our level of comfortability and begin to experience things with other people. And it's not always comfortable. Bernice Johnson Reagan, who's an amazing cultural worker, was in SNCC and a founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock, said, if you're in a coalition and you're comfortable, it's not a broad enough coalition. And that's one of the quotes or sort of things that I have lived by my entire political life. And that political life started with my first demonstration and sit-in in the 3rd grade. And the only way we're going to achieve major change in this society is if we form those coalitions, and they're not always going to be fun. And there are a lot of things that are set up for to divide us, and some things are going to make us very angry. I have great difficulty dealing with people I'm in coalitions with who have racist ideations. They were raised in the same racist culture that I'm a part of, because this is a society founded on white supremacy. And so it makes it rough when I'm trying to work with another group and this unconscious kind of racism comes out. It comes out from some of our own people. I'm right now dealing with a group of people who have decided that they are the only real Americans. And they don't use the term African, you know, they are the original Americans. And I'm like, well, what about Native Americans? What's up with you? They have no relationship. They don't want to hear the word Africa. And they won't deal with anybody who has any Black Caribbean ancestry. And I said, well, now you can cross out Malcolm X, Shirley Chisholm. I don't go down the list, you know? So we have internal problems in our own spaces. And then the minute we step out of them, we have to deal with first ourselves. Don't blame those people. Blame yourself. If you're incapable of broadening your perspective to be able to adjust to something that's different from how you grew up. And I know as a Black person that the cultures of my family in the South are very, very different than some of my relatives that are Northerners. And I've had to make those kind of geographical, you know, regional kinds of shifts, even in the way I speak. And you can't organize people. You can't work in an organizing environment unless you begin to sort of turn yourself into a cultural anthropologist and begin to accept those differences and understand where they come from. Like I would never walk into a Puerto Rican home and be offered a cup of coffee when I come in and say, I don't do coffee, I'm into tea. You know, that's a great way to organize in the Puerto Rican community. You better drink that bustelo, you know. And there are all those kind of small things. And I say small things, but they're really very big things. If you are serious about doing any kind of organizing, and if you want to have people accept you as an ally, and they're going to check you out, you know, for a while. They're not going to automatically just, you show up and you're embraced, you know. You have to sort of prove to people that you're going to be able to function in their environment because you're going into their hood, you're going into their neighborhood, you're going to have to live by their cultural rules. And if you carry too much baggage in with you, people are just going to open the suitcase and say, you're full of shit. So on that note, I think I'll shut up.
I think this is a great a great point to open up to everyone on the subject of discomfort and challenge. And if you're doing this work and it feels easy, that it's not broad enough. So I think with Tiffany right here, we're going to go ahead and introduce the rest of our panelists and bring them onto the screen like the Brady Bunch. You can see them popping up right now. Okay, so we are super honored to have on this call today people who Tiffany and I have spent the last few weeks texting each other excitedly about the work that they do and reading and learning more, and also people who we have intuitively known their work for a long time. So I'm going to go ahead. We're missing one person. I just want to say she is driving rapidly to get here, and hopefully she makes it to a computer quickly. That's Madonna Thunderhawk, and hopefully she'll just pop onto the screen when she's available. If not, we'll just keep moving. But I'll pass it to you, Tiffany.
All right, so first up on our panelists, you just heard from the fabulous Denise Oliver, who I'm just blown away by all the things that you do. You've got a powerful history of organizing, agitating, building movements from within and alongside the Young Lords and the Black Panther Party. Thank you so much. And when I say I'm blown away by some of your works, I was just going crazy, texting Kate saying, man, these are some badass women. and men, Cliff, and men. Kate, I'm gonna give it back over to you.
I'm going to go ahead and introduce Madonna, who's not here, but shout out to her when she comes. But she is a founding leader with the American Indian movement, an incredible Dakota pipeline access activist who has been fighting for water rights in her community. And she also founded the American Indian organization, Women of All Red Nations. She's very cool. I hope she can join us. And also, I'm going to introduce Tylin Agoyo, if you want to wave hi, who does everything. It's very intimidating to speak in front of her because she has a podcast that she runs, and she has done acting work and is a photographer and has written poetry and is the co-founder and director of the We Are Seeds of the Culture Trust, which is a nonprofit committed to uplifting Indigenous voices through art. So a perfect fit for this. Hi, Tylin.
Thank you so much for that.
And I'll pass it back to you, Tiffany.
All right. So our guy here, main man, who you see, I hope that Kate shares the badass photo that she has of Cliff Chambliss in her office right now. He's a fellow Richmonder from Virginia and is the founder of Trinity Projects. Cliff is an artist, an activist, has worked in art, copyright law, and is deeply engaged in civic work at a grassroots level in his home community. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much. Hey, everybody.
Okay, so we want this conversation to flow and to be fluid and for all of you to feel free to jump in. But I think where we wanted to start today was where we started with Denise, which is this feeling of discomfort in your work when it pops up. And we want it to be moving back and forth between our elder generation and also our young emerging activists. But I think I'll start with Tylin about finding your voice through this work and also finding that wall of discomfort and cultural organizing and realizing that you are expanding your work, but also struggling within it.
Hi, well, thank you. I'd like to thank the Creative Justice Initiative for having me here today. I'm so happy to be in this company. Well, I'm in Philadelphia, and I am the director and co-founder of We Are the Seeds, which is an Indigenous arts and culture organization. We have been here for 4 years. We started in, well, almost 2016. And we started as a very small organization that was volunteer-based. And I had worked in other Indigenous arts organizations, and through a process in life, as you do, came to start We Are the Seeds. And it was, it's been an incredible journey here in Philadelphia. We actually do a large Indigenous art show in Santa Fe every year, but last year was canceled because of the pandemic. And so I have been really focusing on building We Are the Seeds and working on the work that we do here in Philadelphia, where I've started to understand that there's a greater need for our work here than there is in Santa Fe, actually, because Santa Fe is, we talked about in one of our conversations about how regions are so important to recognize and being responsive to the community. And so there's a massive problem of erasure, Indigenous erasure here in Philadelphia. And so recognizing the need for representation and showing up and creating space and opportunity for Indigenous artists and performers to tell their stories on their own, in their own voices, is something that is a primary focus for us. And creating opportunity also to earn revenue is a big thing that we do. So yeah, we're a small organization, we're growing, but there have been several challenges, and I'll leave it there, and I'm sure we'll pick up later.
Small organization, but doing big things, as we read and saw, and continue to be on the lookout for.
Thank you so much, Tiffany.
Yes, no worries about that. I just want to share briefly, going through what we're talking about, we talked about being uncomfortable in places. We have something that we say in my coalition where we say there's no resolution without conflict. And so we have to get uncomfortable in order to have a real solid solution. And so a lot of times when people talk about the Rainbow Coalition, it's almost like we have this kumbaya moment where we're all supposed to come together, and we're not supposed to talk about difficulties, and we're not supposed to bring up differences, or we're not supposed to work through them. But I'm interested to know, I'm interested to understand and your opinions about how can we work through, Denise, you're talking about this group of people whom just have this strong feeling. How do we work through the difficulties? We're in a circle, we're talking about change, and we have some issues. I have some stark political parties on this side. I have some stark cultural differences on this side, but we all have that same goal. We say we do, but our differences are what's on the table and taking up all the space. How do we navigate those waters? Cliff, how have you navigated in those waters in your community?
I think that it's really important to be honest and open about the differences, because we have a tendency to not want to hurt people's feelings. And we used to, in the old days of criticism, self-criticism, which we did, we used to call that liberalism, and it wasn't a compliment, right? Because we used to say that kind of liberalism was a corrosive. Because ultimately, if you are afraid to be open and honest, that stuff builds up inside. And anybody who's ever worked inside an organizational structure knows that part and parcel of having any group of people come together is you're going to have conflict. And how you resolve that is not by pretending you don't notice, you know. And I don't mean that you end up becoming a whiner or doing this whole victimhood deal and, you know, snowflake-itis. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that you have to be really open. I remember going with a couple of members of the Young Lords to, we were going up to Orchard Beach, which is where a lot of Puerto Ricans hang out. And we're walking along, and these are younger members who really didn't know my background. And we're walking along the beach, and they made a comment about ese moreno, those niggas over there, blah, 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 blah. You know, just as comfortable making that kind of statement to me. And I turned around and I said, what did you just say? And these two young brothers repeated what they said. And I said, first place, you 4 shades darker than I am. Who you calling a nigger? You know? And second place, I'm black. And they were like, oh, no, you're not. And I'm like, oh, yes, I am. No, I seen your mother. I seen your father. And y'all are all lighter than me. So how you calling yourself black? I said, well, you need to start looking in the mirror and calling yourself black too. And I sat down with them afterwards and I said, you know, that was some racist shit that came out of your mouth. And I realized that that's how you grew up. And I just want to tell you how it makes me feel, you know, and I still love you. I gave them hugs, you know, but I sat them down, and then it became an opportunity for me to give a history lesson on the history of race in America, how people got carted, you know, kidnapped from Africa, brought here and dropped off in Brazil, in Cuba, in Barbados, you know, in Virginia and whatever. And so put a lesson behind it, behind that kind of confrontation, and people also get uptight about the word confrontation. They think that confrontational means you got to get into, and it's not. It means confronting what is there. And the longer you refuse to do that, the more it's going to fester. So that would be my first, just my suggestions from what has worked for me. And because I know that I carry stuff with me and I take it to bed and I wake up in the morning with attitude and I'm like, I really should have said so-and-so to that person and this and that and the other. And because I didn't do it. And when I don't do it, it means that it's going to get worse every time. And then I'm going to be a bundle of resentments, and that's not healthy. And this is within the organization. So if you can't cope with confronting somebody within your group, you're going to have a really difficult time when you're going into the community and you have to deal with a lot of people that you're trying to organize who are going to set you off. And you're going to end up not wanting to organize anything, and leave. A lot of people get burned out because it's not because of the amount of work. They get burned out because of the psychological and emotional stresses of dealing with this work. And this work is not, glorious and glamorous. And it's not just about being on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or whatever, because you're going to have to deal with people, even in the time of COVID. You're going to be dealing with people face to face. You're going to be dealing with reality and not some, fantasy of revolutionary activity, and wokeism or whatever you want to call it. Y'all call it today. Is that the word? I'm not up on a whole lot of. Okay, well, they can take woke and go to sleep.
Wokeism, I like wokeism better though. It kind of blends into different terms. I actually heard an interview with you, Denise, in my mini listening, so I can't remember which one it was, but where you were talking about how people were trying to pin you down in this kind of like liberal utopian fantasy, that you're like a socialist, a communist, that you have this one ideal, and you were just, I think what you just demonstrated and what you're saying is the first thing you felt when this racism emerged was an understanding of the struggle of where these people came from that you were interacting with. And then you were able to say like, okay, but that was whack. That was really bad. And that's like, that breaks that liberal utopian fantasy, right? That we all come in and we're all woke and we're all equally as just and equally as educated. We have the same language and we show up at the table ready to just change the entire world. But that's just not how it goes. And we've got to move people along with us. And I want to pass it to you, Cliff, because I want to hear, there was something that Marta said yesterday on our call all together where we were preparing, where she says, like, people don't show up thinking I'm going to work at a nonprofit and do activism. This is going to be my life. They show up realizing, like, in the work of activism, by seeing the struggles that they're facing in their lives, the struggle that their community is facing, or the struggle that their families are facing. And so I wanted to hear from you just one about the work that you're doing, and also what struggles made you show up at the table in the work that you do.
Thanks so much, Kate. Really appreciate it. Thanks to the Creative Justice Initiative for having me. Just wanted to briefly say that these thoughts are my own. They don't reflect that of my employer. So just wanted to caveat that before I speak. But just wanted to say, my entry into activism has started a long time ago, just through family and through the church, really. But most recently, it happened, obviously, with summer 2020 and the murder of George Floyd. And although I'm not affiliated with a formal organization, my role, or what I knew I needed to do at that moment, was just something personal. And I think that's part of activism as well. It's just not waiting on someone, not waiting on an organization, just to get out there and protest, march, get your message across. And so that was it for me, just in getting my message across. But I think art has its its purpose in being a conversation starter. So it's not the end all be all, but I think art has a way of permeating society and kind of reaching different pockets and corners that someone may not normally be able to reach. And so that was my goal with this summer with the protest sign, Rumors of War Wasn't a Rumor. And just speaking to Kehinde Wiley's piece, which is in Richmond, the Rumors of War statue, and how it was a counter narrative to all of the Confederate statues dotted throughout the city here in Richmond. But the other piece I want to say too is, sometimes organizing takes, again, a solo or an individual aspect, but sometimes even within your community, you may not be able to find that type of alliance. And so I like to think even with, June 2020, you see some people posting on their social media pages a black square, and really that's the only and last thing they posted since then. And so I think things like that kind of show how, even within your community, you may think there's some solidarity or there's some type of cohesion, when in reality, it doesn't really manifest itself that way. But the other piece I wanted to speak to, as far as the struggle, the first thing that comes to my mind, I operate through a lens of the Black church, just growing up in the church, and also being called to the ministry myself, something that's a growing area of my life. But it's often said that Sunday is the most segregated day of the week. And if you really think about it, it is. And especially here in Richmond, where there's such a vibrant and rich religious community, but oftentimes we find ourselves missing one another. And I think there's a way where we could better align within the religious community, within the church community here. And that involves meeting up. And sometimes that should be on Sundays. And so I will say, though, in the latter years or more recently, you see that there are more non-denominational churches or multi-ethnic churches. And so that's a step in the right direction. But I think we have to always remember, or at least from my angle, the role that the church plays in the civil rights movement and in current movements. And it's something that we need to kind of rekindle and bring back into the focus.
Earlier today, Tiffany got her second vaccine. And we were talking before the call, like, hey, where did you all go? And I was saying, well, in Richmond, Virginia, I went to the NASCAR Raceway to get my vaccine. And then Tiffany's like, oh, well, here in Mississippi, we did it in a local church, and they partnered with community organizations. And so it's just a reminder of, like, I think what you just shared there, even for folks who might not be religious, is a tactic, right? Like, meet people where they're at and where they're already gathering in their community. And I'm curious to pass it to Tylin and also hear about, like, what are the strategies that you have found in your life outside of organized activism or organized nonprofits that have carried you into this work or that guide you in what you do?
So I was born into an artist family. My father is a pretty well-known artist. So I was, he went to college when I was young, and I was going to classes with him, and we traveled and would go to art shows and different powwows and, community gatherings. So I was doing that from very young. And my path has taken a lot of different directions, but when I look back on all the things that I've done and that I continue to do, it seems like there's a consistency of striving to create a accurate representation of Native people through my work, whether it's through acting, which is when I left college, I started acting in LA, and that is another long story. But it got very tiring to, at the time, it was 30 years ago, to play these period pieces where women weren't really focused on at all, or just as a girlfriend or a wife, but not honoring women as we are meant to be honored. And then the broken English and all these things. And so moving through these things in my life and learning to find my voice as a young person. And I look I told a story recently where a director, I got to the set and they had changed a scene to make it very violent, and it felt gratuitous and it felt exploitative, and I said no. And now I look back on that, I was like, how did that 20-year-old person make that decision? Because obviously they could have been like, go home, here's your plane ticket, right? And so I don't know where my choices have, like, how my choices have led. Like, I've never considered myself an activist, and we talked about this, like, people say you're activism, but I just know what sits well in my gut and what I can accept and what I cannot. And obviously there are things in your life that you do have to swallow, and then you kind of say, all right, I can't, my stomach's going to hurt. Like, I can't do this. And the last job I left was for an indigenous arts organization in Santa Fe. Things did not go well. And when we talk about in your community or in an organization, people took sides, there was a big backlash. And I left a job, and everybody around me is like, why are you leaving a job? What are you going to do? And I wound up driving Uber. Like, I can't, at this point in my life, like, I can't make those compromises. I didn't believe in what was going on there. And I want this is my one time around. I want to do the good work. I want to do good work that I believe in, and not have to make compromises. And I know I know in a way that's a privilege. I know that's not for everybody, but for me, I am okay with, like, starting over and over and over again.
I wanted to speak. Is my mic on?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
okay. I wanted to speak to what Cliff was talking about, because one of the other things that, I was raised as a dyed-in-the-wool leftist. My dad was a, fellow traveler, communist, atheist. And he sent me to multiple churches. I went to churches, synagogues, you name it. He said, you have to know where people are coming from. And one of the major critiques I have of a lot of people on the left is that because of their own kind of militant atheism, you don't go into somebody's community and say, oh, these people believe in the flying spaghetti monster. And I see it happen all the time. Yeah. Keep your atheism to yourself. Understand that spirituality, no matter which denomination it comes from, is key in every community that I've ever organized in or worked in, whether it's visiting people on the res, whether it's going to a Buddhist temple or a ceremony for Durga in Jackson Heights, or I went to Hebrew school as a kid, because I lived in Brooklyn in a neighborhood of Hasidim. And that kind of narrow thinking, is one of the things that is a real obstacle. That doesn't mean that you don't challenge right-wing evangelicals who would like to see all of us burned at the stake. I'm not saying that you roll over, but I'm saying that tuning into spirituality is a major organizing tool. And I don't impose my belief systems on anyone. I happen to be como Malta, an initiated priestess of an African diasporic tradition, but I go to churches, and I'm just as comfortable with Baptists as I am with Santeros, and I think that's something that we should really address. because deciding that people who have spiritual beliefs are somehow beneath us, behind us, ignorant, is a big mistake.
Yes, Denise, I think that that was amazing, looping that spirituality in, because we just have to recognize, and like you said earlier, be open to other people's differences in their space, and just have that respect there. I think we have a question. Kate, is there a question? Yes. From my friend Ben Fink, a question about coalition organizing. How important to have multi-ethnic churches versus single ethnic churches working in coalitions with each other? Okay. Do you guys, who wants to tackle that question?
I'll jump in there. Yeah. I think it's equally important. I don't think one's more important than the other. Maybe honestly slightly more important for multi-ethnic churches, because you have that racial diversity, where you can have that kind of diversity of thought. You would hope that if you're all under the same church, the same temple, the same roof, that you share similar beliefs. But I think back to the civil rights movement, when you look at how Catholic priests were marching with Dr. King, and there were other religious leaders marching together. But now, it's honestly, it would be hard for me to imagine that, given kind of the political tilt of the church nowadays, and the Catholic Church comes to mind first. I'm not saying it's kind of a monolith, but you're now finding that, Catholics are more kind of right-leaning, and there's not as much seemingly solidarity in place versus years ago, where you found Catholics being more aligned or more a part of the movement. So that's just one example. But I think it's very important, Ben. To your question, though, just overall, it's equally important. It's just one of those things that we have to get back to. And I'm not going to kind of air out any of the kind of Black church laundry, so to speak. But there's a lot of work that can be done really, within the community and then outside of the community as well. I think there should be kind of a reorganizing of efforts, and to really think about the church and to bring the church in, because it's still a stalwart, and it's still a powerful organization that can move thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. It's just that we have to really, take our eyes off of the flashing lights of some of the more popular personalities, and really go back to the institutions that have been there for over 100 years, over 150 years. Some of the Black churches, or churches overall.
I have a kind of awkward question. Okay, I'm throwing this to all of you, and I hope you'll all interrupt. But as the kind of white middling aging woman with a K name on this call, which is not Karen, thankfully for me, but getting close enough to be awkward. Okay. Over the summer, and particularly in Richmond, we have all these Confederate monuments, right, that were being challenged and reclaimed in our city. And we had this kind of flash in the pan moment. And Cliff, you alluded to this earlier, right? The black squares popping up on Instagram and Facebook. And I think we saw something that maybe, Denise, you could speak to this too, that happened in the 1960s, where you have a group of kind of white middle class people, right, who have come from a wealth of a generation. The baby boomers generation have accumulated a little bit of wealth that they've passed on to their children in this age. And they have solidaristic tendencies. They want to show up. They don't know how. And oftentimes this work can be disruptive to movements, or it can kind of slow things down, or there can be infighting and conflict about how those people are showing up. So from the K name on the call, I just want to know, what do we do with these solidaristic tendencies that fall short, but that might have potential to kind of push people forward and further into movements?
Whew.
Great question.
I wind up talking about that issue kind of frequently because I blog, I write on Daily Kos. And it is basically a majority of the people that participate there. I'm not talking about readers, that's different, but there are active participants and a majority are white. So the question comes up, and we have a sub-community called Black Coast, which is kind of interesting because majority of the people in there are white too, but other white people assume because they're in Black Coast that they're Black people. So they get hit with a whole lot of Black, anti-Black stuff. It gets confusing. But the thing I have always said is that I would prefer that white folks with privilege use that privilege in order to deal with organizing other white folks with privilege. And that doesn't mean that I'm barring the door to my organization or my spirituality. I have white guy kids, but if you are dealing with, if you want, this is just my opinion, and I was taught this by my grandmother, and my grandmother was white from Kansas, okay? And you can't get any whiter than people from a farm in Kansas. And she said, white folks need to kick each other's asses. You do not need to be running around dragging some white folk person behind you. She said, because ultimately, if they don't change each other, nothing is going to happen in this country. And I have to remind myself all the time that Black people are only 13% of the population in this country. And I think that when we were having the meeting, pre-meeting yesterday, that Madonna brought up that Native Americans are even a smaller percentage of our population. And so it is imperative that we have allies, but what those allies do, ain't no white person is going to be able to be Black. You cannot walk in my shoes, but I can't be white either. So y'all go and be white and deal with white folks who are kneeling on our necks. And unfortunately, too many of people that I care about are not willing to say, I'm not coming to Thanksgiving dinner this year, because I can't put up with the racism in this household. They are not going to confront their daughter-in-law or their cousin's cousin and whatever. Now, they'll show up and put Black Lives Matter flags up and they'll go to a demo and whatever, but they're silent when racism is right up there in their faces. And unless they deal with their children, their neighbors, the people that work with them, I know I'm going to be dead before this country changes, so I'm not worried about that. I'll just put my 2 cents in until I, croak. But white folks have got to deal with each other, in my opinion.
I love that, Denise. Let's hear from someone else. Cliff, got anything to add?
Yeah, with the whole solidarity piece, I brought that up because, it's important to really look at all sides, when we talk about organizing. And, we have to be able to have those conversations, amongst people that look like us and then people that don't look like us. But, it's hard to really kind of to articulate because it's one of those things like, I don't understand, how you could, do one thing and then not kind of stand behind it on another piece. or not kind of put some action behind it. But I do kind of want to change directions really quickly, though. And I think, now I'm starting to get more of the thought that we should have more conversations with people that are actually on the other end of the spectrum. So forums like this are great. But now, I think really conversations to start to open up with those that are, in, let's say, the United Daughters of the Confederacy or the Proud Boys or these other organizations. I think we should all really come to the table. And I think that's where, honestly, white people could maybe bring those people to the table. So they may not have an open ear to me, asking them to come to the table and talk, but more of an open ear to white people. But I think something like that is important, not to try to change minds, to really have some intellectual honesty, because I really think that's the one thing that's missing in all of this. There's just so much hypocrisy. Just going back to the religious piece, you think about evangelicals. Well, how can you be a follower of Christ when you treat and downtrodden and reduce a whole group of people? How can you be a follower of Christ and then live in this hypocritical way? So I would love to have these conversations with these people. And I think we should do that more as a community, or even in our smaller pockets. I know part of the circles, I don't know the exact name, maybe you can help me with it, but the dialogue circles where the training will take place to figure out how to have these kind of smaller discussions. I think something like, pardon me?
Story circles?
Yeah, story circle, right. So I think something like that is great. And then we should honestly bring in people that are on the other end of the spectrum. And one thing that comes to mind, and we'll honestly probably find that we have more similarities than differences. And one thing that comes to mind is the Black Jeopardy skit on Saturday Night Live. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with it, but I'll kind of give a brief rundown. So Kenan Thompson is the host, a Black guy, and typically they're Black guests. And so for this one particular episode, and they answer questions about Black culture, so it's called Black Jeopardy. So in this one episode, there are two Black people and then one white person played by Tom Hanks, who's wearing a Make America Great Again hat. And so as Tom Hanks answers some of the questions on the Black Jeopardy board, Kenan, the host, looks at him and he's like, your answers sound pretty much like everything the Black community is going through and experiencing. And at the end of the show, or at the end of the clip, you realize that we have more similarities than differences. And so I think something like that, the satire and the humor, the art of it is great to generate the dialogue, but there is some truth in it. And I think that's something that we should unpackage more, that, we should be able to come to the table together, without violence, but just having an honest, intellectually honest conversation just to really parse through things. That's my 2 cents.
I think Tiffany, I'm going to throw you on the table here because this is the work you do.
Yeah.
So from moderator to panelist.
So I just really feel like in the work that we do, that I do as a lead organizer for Performing Our Future, which is a multicultural, multiracial coalition, where we work together to own what we make collectively. There has been and we're so diverse because we have coalitions from the South. We have coalitions in the North. We have rural coalitions. We have very urban coalitions. And so having conversations like this is something that we do on a regular basis. Now, I have my friends and family in Kentucky. When I went to visit there, I was one of very few. Look very different, but they welcomed me in. Gwen Johnson, a lovely, lovely, lovely lady, baker, contributor of Henfield Community Center and Black Sheep Bakery. When I first saw her, and I know she doesn't mind me saying this, when I first saw her, she gave me the biggest hug. And one of the first things she said, oh my goodness, you're Black. But she was so overwhelmed and consumed because I was a person of color and I was going to be leading this coalition. Gwen has done a phenomenal job of understanding the power that she has. She's white, very, very crazy in a good way lady. Crazy because she'll tell you how it is and not sugarcoat it, but at the same time bake you up the best cinnamon rolls that you ever had in your life. But she understands her place in our society as a white woman, and she is yet learning. She is not afraid to call out those in her section of life. She calls it how it is. She understands that she is not Black and that we have these different walks. Also, my other friend that happens to love Trump so much, and I thought his name, I'm going to call him, I won't say his last name, but I probably wouldn't mind.
I don't think he'd be mad at you. I don't think he'd be mad at you.
I don't think he would be mad at me ever. Okay, this Trump supporting guy, make America great again, conspiracy theorist, coronavirus, think it's a hoax man, is in our coalition. But guess what? Guess what he wants to do? The number one thing that he wants to do, make his community better. He's an outstanding fire chief. He does all of this outreach. And we disagree on fundamentally a lot of things, but he is growing to understand and learn differently. Now, Gwen is somebody to call it out. Bill Meade, he may not recognize it as quickly, but he's open to have that dialogue. He definitely understands that he's a white male and I'm a Black female, right? And we have that similarities where we want to work together and build our communities together. But he's open. He's open to the conversation. And so I feel like folks that are Karen and not Kate could always be beneficial to us by just standing, not just standing beside us, but like Denise said, talk to your friends, call them out. Hey, what's going on in your community? You know, just like we don't know what's happening there. I've very rarely been in a room full of all whites. And it just recently happened to me the most of my life, probably in the last few months. But it's important that we all know our role. We all know what we bring to the table, and that we don't shy down from calling truth to power. We don't shy down away from that we speak to it. And we don't have to be all ugly about it. You know, like Denise was saying earlier, people think that conflict is fighting. And in actuality, we're just laying everything on the table, seeing what can we get through, how can we connect our similarities, or how can we connect our differences, and what is that going to benefit the movement? How's that going to benefit the movement moving forward? I hope I made sense. And maybe my vaccine's making me grow some extra limbs and brain cells.
You're brave to take on this panel on the day that you've had your vaccine. And I want to, one thing I feel like is important to point out is that the work that you're doing is very rooted in a community where there's just a deep class dimension that folds in Eastern Kentucky with a long history of organized exploitation by the coal industry. And so I think it makes sense to me that this work is taking root there and that it's growing from those shared struggles that are kind of rooted in class. We had a question that popped up on the bottom of the screen and then it disappeared while I was rambling. Where'd it go? Olga.
Oh, here
it is. White folks need to do their own work, but they must be held accountable for how they are doing it. Most times they need to pay members of the Black, Native American, Latinx, and Asian communities to provide that guidance and coaching.
Okay.
And that leads me to a question I had for Tylin, which is just, you're talking about finding the importance of doing the work that you're doing in Philly, and that it's surprising, right, that work you feel like needs to be done more in Philly. So I think it lends to this conversation. What is it that draws you to show up in Philadelphia with the work that you're doing, and why is it more essential than it was before?
I moved here 5 years ago, but I'm an East Coast native. I'm a descendant of the Narragansett tribe in Rhode Island, and I grew up in Rhode Island, and and in Brooklyn, New York. So I've had grew up in a lot of different worlds, right? When I moved to Philly, I had moved fresh from Santa Fe, where there is a lot of indigenous folks are walking down the street, and the tourism is steeped in the commodification of indigenous culture and native art, and it's very different. And so coming back home, which was really important to me to be back on the East Coast with my family, it's different. New York, growing up in New York, New York has the largest population of Native people of any city in the United States. And you can talk to a lot of people and they will have no idea that any Native people live there. And then moving to Philadelphia, there is an indigenous community here. There was one existing when I got here, you know, and there has been a lot of work in the past. But as a city that, you know, prides itself on being the birthplace of America, and people come here to go to Independence Hall and Constitution Center, and there is no representation and there is no acknowledgement that this is Native land, that Native people were instrumental in creating this city. It's zero. Like I remember when I first moved here, I took a walk, and the only thing I saw was in the church, in the graveyard, there was a sign that said, oh, 7 Native leaders came here to meet with George Washington or something, and they died. And I'm like, all right, so that's real, you know, disrespectful. And how come that's the only thing that I'm seeing? There's nothing else. And it hit me. I think it's shameful, and I think that there's no city effort to make sure that our stories are being told here. It's purposeful, and it's continued genocide. And I think that you know, I've lost your question. What was your original question?
You were on it. You answered it.
I answered it? Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. So why is it important that we're doing the work we're doing in Philadelphia? I would like to, and to tag on to the last question, is that the last conversation is that I do see there's a lot of anti-racist work happening here from non-Native people and white people, right? White people are doing this work. A dear friend of mine actually is part of this anti-racist hotline. And anytime I have an issue, she's like, do you have them call me? And I will explain to them. She's the best. But I want to say that work is amazing. And there's so many incredible nonprofits here. Philadelphia has these beautiful organizations. And a lot of them are run by white people, have reached out to me, wanting to partner, wanting to understand how to incorporate Indigenous voices into their work, actively seeking me out to make sure that I'm a part of their work. And it's been really beautiful to see that. And that's what I really love about being in the art community here in Philadelphia. But with our work, with reaching out to the youth, I think that's where it is a really good start. Because I think a lot of times white people don't, and not even white people, but people who are not Native, in the case of what we're educating about, don't know. And we will have events or programs, and people will say, I had no idea that was offensive, that language was offensive, or that was hurtful. And I think that when you start in schools, you have to start there with the very basics here in Philadelphia. And that's what we're doing. But I see really good work here, and there's some wonderful people. So I'm grateful for that, because I know it could be the other way too.
It's that literacy piece, which is, I think, goes back to Denise, your point about like showing up at the kitchen table. That's where a lot of the work gets done that we do, not in these nonprofit organizations all the time, as someone sitting in a nonprofit organization for life probably, but it's really around the kitchen table with each other, or on Sunday, as you said, Cliff, or wherever people come and gather in a community. And I think I want to bring us back out a little bit into just a discussion about what a daily practice in your life, like a holistic daily practice, looks like towards equity and liberation and justice. What does it mean in your day-to-day? And Denise, I'm going to kick it to you. I saw your dog up there a minute ago.
There's 3 dogs here. They're being quiet for once. A daily practice? I do have something that I do daily. After Hurricane Maria, I made what is called a promesa, which is a sort of spiritual commitment to do something. And it's a tradition that people who practice what is called espiritismo in the community do. So I made a commitment that every day I was going to post something online about Puerto Rico. And I get up at 4:30 in the morning and I scan the news because unfortunately, most of the news that's available about Puerto Rico is in Spanish and it's not in English. And a majority of people here on the mainland are not going to go get Google Translate and try and read up on news. And then some of the reporters for major media that they have assigned to deal with Puerto Rico don't know shit. Excuse my French. And merde. And so I literally made that promise. And every morning I get up, look for news, and then I post the number of days it's been since Hurricane Maria. And over time, people have said to me, "Are you still doing that?" And I go, "Yes," because people still have blue tarps for roofs on their houses. And Vieques still doesn't have a hospital. And, I could go on, but that's my commitment. And I also scan the newspapers and PR, and anything that I think that is relevant, I drop it. Now, does that mean that I have this huge following of people that give a damn? No. But I have found, and it's directed at a lot of people that follow me on social media are Black. And it has developed an awareness of paying attention to, well, I mean, there are a lot of Black Puerto Ricans too, but something that not normally they would ignore unless maybe they were from New York or someplace that has a fairly large Puerto Rican community. So that's my spiritual practice on a daily basis. It is 1,315 days since Hurricane Maria, and this is what's going on.
Cliff, I'd love to hear from you too. I mean, I think that intentionality of waking up and recognizing a crisis that's still underway and not moving beyond it each day is significant. And what for you, Cliff, is like a daily practice or routine that you return to that grounds you back in the struggles of your community or what you're fighting for?
I'll honestly say my existence as a Black person is a daily practice. And it's not a struggle always per se, but the existing in a space as a Black person is a practice. And I think that, with a society that tries to stifle or steal your joy or take things from you or disadvantage you, I think the act of living is a practice, is a practice and a form of protest. But to more directly answer your question, though, it's about being spiritually grounded for me. I mean, every morning I do my morning devotional. So it's a way for me to really get in tune, get grounded at the start of the day. And then also some days I do a Bible study with a small group of people on Clubhouse. So it's just a way of building community and just having kind of that space where we can exist, talk, dialogue, and grow together. And so I think that's part of it. The other piece is, just in my day-to-day work with my job and all, just in helping the creative community. So part of what I do, I correspond with the people of America with their artistic questions, any type of anything dealing with copyright law or policy. But in that, I find myself talking to a lot of minorities, a lot of Black people, a lot of people from across the spectrum, but really I find joy in helping them succeed and protect what they've created, protect their expressions. And part of that is in some ways a form of protest, just the ability to create, because I think, really people don't really realize how many angles society tries to limit or stifle Black people. And so just, again, in the act of existing and living is a practice and a form of protest. So I think it's kind of hard to answer, at least from my shoes, because I feel like that's just what it is. Like, excellence is not an option. And, from that flows a lot of things. But, I don't know if there's a particular daily practice, I would say, but just the act of living as a Black person, Black people can identify with that.
Tiffany, you're on mute.
and yet
you're back on mute.
I'm on mute. Can you guys hear me? You guys were like, it was so crazy. But I just want to open up questioning, and I will have a first one here. The emotional labor of engaging those who do not honor or respect your humanity is not only counterproductive, but digresses from the collective substantiability of our well-being. That was like a statement, but a well-stated one. I like that.
I need a lighter. I do want to open up this part too. I want to introduce Neda Martinez, who most of you probably know from the other calls, and she'll be guiding these questions, but also to the panelists. If you want to go off mute, and if people ask a question or if they make a statement that resonates or that you respond to, please just pop up and take it.
Okay. We've got talking about the intellectual honesty. How do we engage in creation of coalitions in today's polarized environment? Not only religious polarization, but social, racial, cultural, and political framing, maybe?
All right, panelists, take it.
We've seen some coalitions built in our lifetime, because we've been talking a lot about racial and ethnic coalitions, but I think that we've also been dealing with the development of coalitions around the rainbow flag, for example, and that's something that we have to take a look at too. And I'm not saying that there are not conflicts, because we kept adding letters to the agenda. And my goddaughter is trans, and we have lots of discussions about where those things stand in, she calls it the alphabet soup, and then you add on to that issues of ethnicity and race within those contexts, and so there can be conflict. But it also that's a form of coalition building there too, and I think that we talk about the polarized environment, but we don't talk enough about where we have had successes, because it's very easy to just throw your hands up in the air and say, none of this shit is working, the hell with it, I'm just going to go off and, I don't know, do whatever. And I am never going to allow myself to give up. The woman that turned my life around in 1964 was Fannie Lou Hamer. I got to spend a day with her, one day. And it was enough to just completely and totally knock me off of what I had planned to do with my life. And I figured if that woman could be beaten to within an inch of her life just for wanting to register the vote, not even about voting, you know, and stand up and go against the entire political structure in this country. And she was somebody who did not have the advantages I had. I was in college. I was in my first year of college. She grew up as a sharecropper. And she just bowled me over, you know. So I think that to the person that asked that question, sit down and think about actual coalitions that exist right now, you know, and they are there. And then figure out what it is that they're doing right and take it from there.
Yeah. So if I can ask, so we agree and support this call for liberation and anti-racism. As we move forward in our daily life and activities, how do we prioritize? What are your priorities when we show up?
Who is that to?
Anyone wants to take it?
I'll chime in. I'll step in. So a priority for me now is economic rights. You know, I think there needs to be a new discussion around a new movement for Black and brown people. And the best way I could put it is an economic rights movement. And so part of that is around reparations, which will obviously take some time as it goes through kind of the legal process. You know, it's often said that the law catches up to society, or the changes that are made, the law is usually behind and catching up. But what really comes to mind is like the crowdfunding model. And I really think about kind of the complexity of racism nowadays, to be honest. So if you think about the 50s and 60s, where it was just in your face and you just knew what it was and it was very kind of clear cut. Now it's just a very kind of, it's so multi-pronged that you really can't even dissect it all. And so I say that to say that, you know, there need to be some kind of internal discussions about how we can fund our own selves, so to speak, until these kind of reparation-like movements or reparation-type actions come into play. And so one thing that comes to mind is just thinking about all of the kind of the intellectual power that we have within the community. So we think about, again, in the 50s and 60s, where, you know, the numbers of people, let's say, that were trained in, you know, that went to business school, or that were lawyers, or that, you know, had these kind of advanced degrees. You know, now we're in a place where our intellectual capital as a community is a lot larger. So we need to be strategizing better. So I think that kind of ties into, I saw a comment earlier pop up, like there's no point in talking to people that don't have your best interest at heart, or something like that, or there's no point in kind of having a conversation. And I partially agree with that. So I think that, you know, there needs to be more kind of inner community conversations where we really strategize and figure out how we can have like reparations, like programs that can be created. So, for example, one thing, just from a high level, I know, you know, this is not worked out all the nuts and bolts, but imagine, okay, you have 30 white people that want to, you know, make a difference, and they have the economic resources. We talk about privilege. We know that, you know, the wealth gap is larger now than ever before. So we think about the resources that these communities have. So if you want to really make a difference, open up your pocketbook. You know, I've said that before in other areas, but like, you know, put your money where your protest is. I've said that before in another forum, but, you know, there's a way where we can really pool resources together in a strategic way that can then be funneled directly to people that need it. So I think about even gentrification, where, you know, you see home ownership, you know, declining in the cities, and the landscape changing. And even there are well-meaning white people that are moving into these cities that are liberal, but the impact on Black people is not that it's not that light. So it's a heavier impact on Black people, even when liberal white people move into these communities. So I say all of that to say is that we should be creating programs and bringing our best minds together so we can pull together communities' resources to then funnel it out to Black people. So let me go back to that example with white people. So let's say you have 30 white people that have $1,000 at their disposal, which is pretty realistic. So imagine getting those people to donate $1,000 to an organization that would then funnel money to a particular Black person to own a home in the inner city. You know, something like that provides more tangible results versus like these kind of theoretical discussions. You know, and I brought that up when we had our pre-conversation, but it's just something that's actually measurable. And that's kind of like the business side of me coming out, but something that we can actually say, okay, well, all right, if you want to make a difference, then put your money where you want to make a difference. Because honestly, we know that Black people, you know, money doesn't buy happiness, right? That we hear money doesn't buy happiness, but to Black people, you know, it brings a different type of happiness and stability, you know, where, you know, I mean, poverty is a real thing. And, you know, you really have to think about how we can really reach these people at the ground level. And I think about, you know, some of the celebrities, and I'm not, you know, going to engage, I guess, in call out culture, but, you know, we have plenty of even celebrities within the community that have, you know, tens, dozens, hundreds of $1 millions at their disposal where it could be kind of pooled and we could really kind of get the best minds together to really figure out how to grow that and how to really get it to people. And I know I'm talking very high level, but these things are not far off. And we have, again, that's why I go back to the kind of the knowledge and the training that we have now versus the 50s and 60s, where we have these resources in place, these people in place that can do, you know, venture capital funds and private equity funds and all of these other types of like financial products and vehicles that could really mobilize and help Black people. And so I think that's something that we should, you know, engage more with as far as like the cross-cultural organizing, is that, you know, we can go cross disciplines. And I think the finance area is the next frontier, because, you know, we have all these laws in place and voting laws are great. And that's, you know, everything has its role. But I think the economic rights movement has to be the next focus, because without that, I mean, our communities are going to disappear from the city. And then we're going to have all of these well-meaning white people, you know, which are great, you know, and liberals walking around, but now they've displaced all of the Black people. So, and Black and brown people. So I just wanted to deposit that.
Cliff, there's another question for you actually at the bottom here, if you can see it. It says, historically, the church has been complicit in slavery. We do not have to deal with this history. We have not been building over time and have people being shot in the back. Statements.
Yeah, you know, I wouldn't say the church has been complicit in slavery. You look at Nat Turner, who was a preacher. I mean, he ran through dozens of white people and killed them all. So I don't know if he's, you know, complicit, and he was in a religious position. So I'm not sure who asked that or what kind of frame they're coming from it with. But I mean, the Black church has been the #1 organization since slavery that has uplifted countless Black people. So it's really hard for me to wrap my mind around that question, because I don't see that. I've never seen that.
We have another question that popped up too that's kind of hidden in the chat here. It goes actually back to what Denise was saying. But first off, I want to say the LGBTQIA+, it is so natural to quote the First Rainbow Coalition. Actually, there's a quote in the First Rainbow Coalition where somebody said, oh, it's just natural that we would all come together and organize because we have these shared struggles. And I was like, that is bullshit. It just doesn't feel natural at all. It's like, it really stood out as being just patently false when I heard that quote in the film. But when Denise, you brought up LGBTQIA+, or the alphabet soup, as you called it, I was like, it is so intuitive to me that I have not thought of it within the framework of coalition building. And you providing that like let's look to something that's actually succeeding and start to name and identify these coalitions that exist that have become so intrinsic in our society that we don't even recognize them as such. So I think, yeah.
Let me give you a little bit, a piece of history. It was not that easy. And I spent a lot of time working with the early days of the AIDS epidemic. And I remember going to a meeting at St. Mark's Church, and a majority of the people in the meeting were women. Everyone in the room was white except for me, okay? And the women in the room were public health workers and people like that, right? And about 2/3 of the women in the room said, fuck that. We don't want to deal with this because it's men and we are feminists. And so I don't care if a bunch of dudes are dying from this disease. And I was sitting there like, what? And this was called radical feminist separatist some shit. And I was appalled. And there were other women in the room who were like, this is crazy. And our brothers, they're not our brothers, you know, because they're men and whatever. And I'm sitting there like this, going, these people are out of their minds. And I jumped up and went off. I cursed all of them people out. I said, I have been a feminist since the day I dropped out of my mother's womb. And if this is what you call feminism, because y'all sound like fascists to me, you know, and there was no way in hell. And then there was another series of struggles, which was the split in the HIV/AIDS community between those people who contracted the virus because of injection drug use and those people who contracted the virus and I went to GMHC. I took one of the people from my street who was a gay male drug injector. I took him to Gay Men's Health Crisis, and they didn't want to give him any services. And I went off in the GMHC office and said I was going to tear their office apart and set it on fire if they didn't treat my friend Noel. So we have to look at a lot of that history doesn't get discussed. Now there's a rainbow flag and they're adding another strip to the bottom, you know, but there were issues. Sylvia Rivera was a community worker with the Young Lords, right? And the term transgender didn't exist at that time, and whatever. She was a drag queen that came and hung out. And I took her to her first meeting of Third World Gay Revolution down at the firehouse. And we had fights within the organization about whether or not the Lords we had a women's caucus and then we had a gay and lesbian caucus. But there were other radical organizations that were not having it, okay, at all. And I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about they were not having it. Native American gay people, the term two-spirit was not accepted among some of my friends who were organizing. There were organizations that were trying to force lesbian women to have male partners under military orders. I saw it happen. So we have to, again, get truthful about that history and the struggles that took place in the past and not whitewash them or wash over them. I shouldn't use the term whitewash, that's not right. And understand that it takes time and it's a lot of struggle, and pretending it didn't happen doesn't help anybody because I watched it happen.
Somebody named Ron said, Miss Denise, I love you.
Yes, Denise, we love you. So the struggle is far from over, and we're all stuck at home under this pandemic, and we all have to deal with climate change and climate justice. So where are these nodes, or how can these networks align? Where do we find or create these spaces for collaborating?
The deep sigh of everybody on the panel.
Well, given how you just started off the question, just acknowledging the pandemic, I think online is a great place to start, similar to what we're doing. But, social media is great as well. And I know, at least within the Black community, there's a higher engagement in social media and kind of the activism of social media and the ability to voice your concerns, your positions, any grievances, or any type of societal issues. I think the internet is the equalizer, the great equalizer. It's commonly said, but there's a way to leverage how we are, how we're reaching one another. And I go back to just the whole art piece. And that's the beauty of art with activism, is that it can really kind of proliferate a lot of areas of society. And social media helps. The internet helps with that. I mean, I can't imagine, viral moments are a real thing. And so with those viral moments, it's a way of kind of collaborating, and at least how I notice how, the people I follow use social media, it is inherently collaborative because, those people that, we know best and that we trust best are usually those that we follow or that follow us, at least within a smaller kind of follower count. So I say all of that to say is like the internet is a real thing, and social media is too. I mean, I look at some of the work that, I have a good friend that works for When We All Vote, and the way she uses social media is so commendable because, she's able to kind of engage from a different angle, and it works well. I'm really engaged with what she does, but I think it's a form of organizing, and it's using social media to do it. And I'll briefly say, I mean, at least, within the Black community, the brown community, we use social media to have almost like a level of like keeping in touch. It's almost like it keeps us bonded because our relationships are so spread out, because honestly, it's just a numbers game. So if I were to go out here in the city of Richmond, would I find as many people that look like me and like-minded that I could really engage with, or would I have more of that on social media? And so I think there's an inherent strength there where, we can leverage it differently and leverage it better. I hope that answers your question.
It does. We have this tool, and it's powerful for this kind of horizontal community building, finding people who are like you, who might not even live in your same region, or I think it's a really powerful tool. And then I think looking back to Tiffany, what you were talking about earlier is just coalition building, like really people coming together with shared values and shared struggles. And I think, Tiffany and I have been working to build a coalition for a year across the South, and Nada's been a part of it. And it has been intensely hard. It has been incredibly hard to build this coalition through the internet alone. And we've kind of branched out into doing phone calls, but making these connections that are kind of rooted in good faith and trust is really challenging when you're not having those interactions face to face. And I think what's been driving it is that there's a core group of people who know each other and who believe in each other's work. And so, the answer that always comes to my mind for your question, Nada, is like people have got to get in a room together, and they've got to get clear on what it is that they care about and what it is that they stand for. And then on the last call that we had that you co-moderated with Ben, we had Jasmine Leeward. She's like, people can go in the streets all day. We can keep marching around these monuments, but people have got to get organized in terms of like, who is it that we're going to keep showing up in the room with over and over and over again, and who we have enough trust with that person to just mess up and in good faith come to each other. So I think the next step after this pandemic is coming together in this space, going to Puerto Rico to see Marta because she extended the invitation and she can't take it. There's
coming. I want to say that you have to have a balance, because you know, I'm 73 years old, and we didn't have internet, you know, smartphones. My students laughed at me because I had a clamshell phone because they were talking about, well, I want to text you. And I said, my phone doesn't get that, you know. And they made me buy a different phone. And then they said they were going to put apps on it. I said, what's the app? You know, and they set up all this crap for me on this damn phone. And they got me a big one because they told me I was blind, and a cheap one because they knew I was a poor adjunct. Anyway, the point I want to make is that it's wonderful. We find out stuff that's going on in some community that's on the other side of the planet. But look at what has happened here today. Madonna is not here because she lost internet on the res and has to drive someplace to even try to get to internet. I was around when the first radio station and helped get the funding for Kiri Radio, which is Lakota. They broadcast in Lakota and in English. And there are still huge swaths of this country that don't have internet access or high-speed access or whatever. My friends, my age, are amazed. They go, oh my God, you go on that Twitter thing? And they use Facebook just to send pictures of their grandkids to somebody, right? They are not using it politically. And they don't do Twitter, and they're not doing TikTok and the rest of that stuff. Organizing is still requires that at some point you're sitting in somebody's kitchen table, listening to them and talking to them and relating to them and not lecturing them, talking down at them with your highfalutin revolutionary knowledge. And let me tell you something. I can't stand academics. They get on my nerves. And I mean, knowledge is wonderful and writing books is great, but then anybody that sits there and talks about the epistemological dialogic deconstruction of the paradigm shift of the Latinxes, there's people in the community are like, y'all got typos on that banner because you spelled Latino wrong. You know, and I mean, I know it's wonderful and everybody has to be politically correct, but people in the community, y'all have gone so far away from where folks are at that you, like I said, suffering from wokeism. And you done woke yourself right out the door. What you need to be doing is going in the door and sitting down at the table and talking to folks. And I know COVID, this is wonderful, these Zoom things, or whatever. This is not Zoom, but you know what I mean. But that kind of face-to-face contact is critical. And at the same time, use some of the benefits of this incredible technology. I'm very happy. I'm on Twitter cursing people out every day, you know, having a good old time. But I still talk to people. And now that I can't go in their house, I'm on the phone with them, you know, and discussing stuff. And the people I'm talking to a lot of times are not, you know, the political da-da-da-da-da-das. They regular folks. They work in hospitals, you know, they work in 9 to 5, they're doing whatever. I talk to everybody. I'm always asked them to tell me about their lives, where they're from, tell me about your family, you know, and find something to connect, not bludgeon them with my political agenda immediately that they have to, like, no, man, you know, talk to people like basic stuff, regular conversations. The minute that you start labeling yourself in your head, radical activists, you have just disconnected from about 95% of the population, because only 5% of the population, it may not even be that much of revolutionary activists, right on, power to the people. You know, I'm sorry, but that stuff does not impress me at all.
Denise, thank you for saying that. When you're saying radical, it makes me think of something that Marta said. You know, we're not radical; we're human, and it is very, very near and dear to us that we make that connection. But also to what you were talking about, having an organic connection with people, talking about something, finding a similarity, and not beating people over the head with the wokeism. I'm gonna steal that, Denise. I thank you for bringing that to our attention. So we've got another question on the screen, and I'm going to segue into that. Says, as a future mental health counselor, what would you suggest is the best way for myself to advocate for social change within these communities where opportunity is limited and racism is so dominant? Interesting. Anyone? Thailand? Come on in.
I would say that mental health, spiritual health, emotional health is all linked to the you talking about opportunities limited and racism is dominant. Well, racism is dominant everywhere, and I think that even the people who don't know they're being affected by it, because one of the things that distresses me is that we tend to talk about the impact of racism on us as Black people or as Indigenous people or as Asian people. But we forget that it also affects white folks, except they don't know how damaging it is because they don't see that. You know, anything that's corrosive to the body politic and ends up rotting everyone. That's like when Native people talk about caring for the earth because we're all on it, you know, and it isn't just the job of Indigenous people to take care of Mother Earth, you know, and so as a mental health counselor, one, I think the first step is to even just recognize the negative impact on people's mental, emotional, and spiritual health. I can't disconnect. I got a mosquito in here. I'm not a Jane. I will. But people even knowing and reaching out to people so that they are aware of what they're going through. I know I had to I couldn't watch the Chauvin trial because I knew that it was mentally damaging for me. I can't look at I call it Black snuff porn, you know. Yet another video of a dead Black person being brutalized, mutilated, done in, done out. You know, it is pornography because they run it over and over. And I know what that does to my head, you know. And when I can't take it anymore, I go and play World of Warcraft and kill things, you know. No, I'm serious. I'm in a socialist political guild on World of Warcraft.
You've got a clam phone and you're playing World of Warcraft?
I've been a gamer since Dungeons and Dragons, child. You know. And I'm not supposed to talk about that because radical political people don't do that stuff, you know. No, it's a stress reducer. I kill orcs and things, you know, whatever. I mean, I need to do something or stand in the middle of the street and raise my hands up in the air and scream, you know. And I have been listening to more music these days. I started writing just about music on Sundays at my Daily Coast blog because it was a stress reducer for all of the political people to just come in and let's talk about jazz or let's talk about funk or let's, you know, because you need some detoxification from the toxicity of what we're in.
Yes. Yes, that's a great point, Denise, of having that outlet for these times, living as a person of color in these times. Taylor, I want to bring you back in so that you can speak a little bit to what we're talking about here. I thought you were going to share something with us.
Oh, about the mental health, I was just thinking that change happens within ourselves first, and then within our families, and maybe breaking the cycles of the past, continuing in a good way with your children, and then that goes out to community. So as a mental health counselor, I would say, lifting people and providing those resources where people can understand what self-care is, and how, because a lot of us weren't raised in that way, where we thought we could take time for ourselves. That was never taught to me. It was always do this, do that, we got to keep moving, all these things. And it's really important. It's key and I'm not talking about like spa days or things like that. I'm talking about like serious self-work and starting at the foundation of who you are as women, as family, as caretakers. I think that's really important to emphasize as a mental health worker in any community.
Yes, thank you for that. I think I'm getting a note that we need to loop it. Well, we've got another question on the screen. Okay. Last question, I think. Any suggestions on how to narrow the organizing scope when working within a group? While organizing, people are diverting focus from outrage on Flint water, online learning, poor areas versus in-person, wealthier areas, policing, community violence, and now COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, while failing to pass one of the nearly 200 anti-lynching bills, resulting in no deliverables. Whoa. Anybody can answer this question. Any suggestions on how to narrow the organizing scope when working within a group? I think we kind of hit on that with this discussion about just recognizing yourself, recognizing the differences that you have and also the similarities, and being open and honest with yourself in a group. Does anybody else have anything?
Yeah, I think it's important. Are you hearing me? Because I'm getting a feedback.
Yeah.
That we do narrow figure out where our strengths are. And, it's really hard. And I think when Cliff was saying that the internet is so valuable, but to Denise's point too, that it can also be completely overwhelming. We have so much knowledge. There's so much coming to us every day, and it's exhausting, and it can really burn you out. And with We Are the Seeds, we centered celebrating contemporary Indigenous people, right? We centered joy, and this is our focus, and we educate through that focus. And I think our work is impactful because of that. And every time I step out, and they call it mission drift or something, every time I'm like, oh, let me try this. I'm like, oh, no, Thailand, this is what you said you were going to do. This is what we're going to do. And until you're ready to move to the next step, you're going to stay focused, because otherwise first of all, a lot of us are working by ourselves, not financially really funded as much as we should be. You can't exhaust this. You can't exhaust the people you're working with. It has to be very focused, very intentional, and very honest, because we can't change everything. We can't do everything, but we can change things with small steps. And then it doesn't feel so overwhelming or depressing, which it often feels very depressing. But, take one small step, one small achievement, It makes a big impact.
I'll just briefly add something. I think it's not really, I guess, narrowing. It's just finding your lane, finding your interest, and how that interest kind of aligns with the impact that you want to make. So I think about myself, I enjoy working with the youth. I enjoy nature. I enjoy the outdoors. And so with that, I found that my skill set, my interests, my volunteerism would best be aligned with the Boy Scouts of America, something that kind of aligns in all those areas. And then, to go back to the church, because it's just such a beautiful example, church is a great example of, you can still have a wide net and still have, your individual lanes or ministries, which is what, churches say. So you have a homeless ministry, you have the youth ministry, you have young adult ministry, you have various types of missions within the church. So it's still one body moving forward, but you have different people that are aligned in different areas based upon their interests or just where they could be used best. So, I think, the question is great, but, like someone else just said earlier, you can tire yourself out, but I think it's best where you find where your strengths are, where your interests are, and how to make the most impact. And everybody can still play a role as this kind of one larger unit.
And I guess just building on that, and just in the words of the great late James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And it's critical. So as we're winding down, welcome back, Marta and Ray.
Hi. Well, I think, first of all, thank you for this very rich discussion. Am I on? Do you hear me? Yeah. For this very rich discussion. And I think the one thing that we have to understand is that we work locally, but we also work nationally and internationally, because there is systemic racism. There is systemic killing of our people. Native populations, brown populations, African American populations. That has been a constant, and it has been built into this country, as Denise said, so that we can't view the world from just us as a point of entry. We have to see us as a continuum of history, a continuum of our people, and the journey that our people have gone through for us to be here. And when I see and I hear that a young man has been killed, I think of my two sons. That a young girl has been killed, I think of my granddaughters. That native populations are dying at a higher rate with a smaller population, I have to think about that as well, because I'm in a community that was built by enslaved Africans that refused to be enslaved and ran away, a maroon community. And what is being experienced by the native community of not having the necessary infrastructure, right, to get online, to be able to educate children online, because the internet goes when there's wind, when it rains, right? And I'm in an area where there are no schools. A community where there are no schools. Children have to travel more than 30 minutes by car because there's no trains here. And you barely see a bus to get to a school. So that as we look at our personal realities, right? We also have to project our personal realities historically and to the present, because we are that continuum. We are the continuum of the people that came before us. And we also have to look at the mishistory that we have been taught, and the language that we use in talking about our experience, because we oftentimes use the terminology that has oppressed us to look for liberation. And we need to look for new words and new definitions to talk about what we're talking about to liberate ourselves. Not only liberate our minds, but liberate our bodies, right? While we are doing the necessary work of making sure that we can stay alive and that we can nurture our young, right? So this conversation was critical and is critical because the conversation of having young people that are beginning to think in ways that they are seeing broader than themselves also means that you're part of the continuum of what Denise has gone through, what I have gone through, what Ray has gone through, what Neda has gone through, because you are that continuum and have to know the stories. But you have to know the stories from people who are truth tellers, right? And how we get that truth to you and how we get that truth to our communities is critical because we don't have the schools, we don't have the locations, right? That you can get your education through. So you have to find that education. You have to look for those spaces to get that education. But critical at this moment in time is that in January 6th, this government was challenged and is challenged. We don't know, and Denise called it, right? We were in fascism for a moment. And the question is, are we still in it? Right? Because people still do not, there are some people who still do not accept, right? The president-elect of the United States. So how do we get there? How do we get there? And at the same time, young people, men in our communities are being killed in the back. So that we have to be thinking of ways to articulate the reality of now that creates change, because we do want our Native populations and our Black populations and our brown populations, Asian populations to survive and not have to live, like Cliff was saying, with fear of being confronted by the possibility of death when you walk out the door.
Yeah.
So that in this process of looking at coalition building, we have to look, in my opinion, what is the priority? Is it to stay alive? I think that's a priority. And that's a priority that touches us all in this moment. Right? And there are very local priorities of self-care, of taking care of our children, of taking care of our families, of keeping a roof over our heads when gentrification is facing us, most of our community in the face. And I can only think, right, because we believe in our ancestors, and you know, many of our communities now sort of getting hit to ancestors, but I also remind people that George Washington was an ancestor, Lincoln was an ancestor to some people, right? The founding fathers didn't look like my daddy. So that when we speak, we have to speak about who were our ancestors and what did they do? And who are the ancestors of others and do what they do and what they did, right? Because native land belongs to native populations, but pieces of paper says it doesn't. I'm in a Black community that was founded by runaway enslaved Africans, and most people do not have paper for their land. And they have the risk every day of being displaced. Adolfina Villanueva was killed with babies in her hand because she refused to leave her ancestral home. All right, so this is the reality of us today. So that as we think through how we build coalitions, we have to think through how we build coalitions. And this is the importance of the clip for me. And I'm glad that Ray and Nada, brought that clip forward again, because the importance of understanding that there are points that we have to organize on, right? We may not agree 100% on anything, but there's certain points that we have to agree upon and organize around if the future of our children is going to be better than the future we have. Because that's what our parents and our grandparents fought for it to be better for us than it was for them.
And so I just want to acknowledge that, unfortunately, Madonna Thunderhawk couldn't join us, as you know, because she had poor internet connection on the reservation. But I do want to acknowledge and celebrate the work of our documentary colleague, Beth Castle, whose film Warrior Women is also available on PBS. So I'd very much invite everyone to learn about the legacy and of the struggle that's ongoing for justice in the Native community, and the legendary work, the living legendary work of Madonna Thunderhawk, Revisit Ray's film, and just all of these living legends that have paved the way so that we can be here and continue to work and be this bridge generation where we're so blessed to be connected with people like Denise and Martha and Dudley and Madonna, and then working with the younger folks to really save the earth, like Martha says, so that we can all breathe.
So thank you all again. And we will continue. As I said before, the survey is coming out at the end of May. A brown paper gathering the suggestions and the recommendations you have made on this panel and previous panels will be included in that brown paper with actions forward and demands, right? Because things have to change. And I want them to change for my granddaughter and for her grandbabies, so that the work is on and it's ongoing. Thanks to you. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha.